Okay, I lied. This is not a manga recap, it's a light novel recap. There is a manga adaptation, but the manga is nowhere near where the light novel is. That being said, this series is available as an audiobook, so go listen to it if you don't want to read. Why should you? Stick around and I'll tell you. Every once in a while, you come across a light novel that leaves you wondering how it would be possible to translate into an anime. There's so much introspection, so much internal monologuing, and so much backstory needed to explain the series that my guess is most studios wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Who knows? Maybe I'll be proven wrong. And if I am, hopefully it's done by a team who loves this series as much as I do. Welcome once again to Musings by Danon. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Danon, and I'm currently reading over 600 manga and light novels. My two favorite genres are fantasy and romance. So on this channel, we talk a lot about both of those genres, but we tend to look more into story structure and tropes rather than how cool the fight scenes are or how great the animation or artwork is. Which brings me to the subject of today's video, min-maxing my TRPG build in another world, spreading the good word of Mr. Henderson. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly ask you to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel and it's free. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. Now, I've already done a video on this series, and that video mostly explained what a TRPG is and who Old Man Henderson is, as well as what the Henderson scale is. If you already know what all of those are, great. If not, go watch that video real quick and then come back. Link in the upper right-hand corner. Ready? Okay, let's get started. This is an Isekai series where the main character wasn't obsessed with video games. He wasn't forced into playing an otome game by his sister and then wound up inside of it. He wasn't granted a new life due to a god's mistake or a trickster deity. He dies of cancer and is given the chance to help out a troubled world. The gods aren't allowed to interfere directly, but they can send agents to help steer the course of human events. So, when our main character, who spent over 30 years rolling dice, making characters, reading supplements, playing and running tabletop role-playing games, dies, he asks for the ability to make his character how he wants. He is granted this ability. At age 5, when Eric first realizes who he is and that he has the memories of two people, he starts to dig into the system. After initially being overwhelmed at the sheer amount of data, he starts to get excited. Everyone gains incremental experience through accomplishing tasks. The harder the task, the more experience you gain. For every dish you wash, you increase your skill as a dishwasher. For every meal you prepare, the more accomplished chef you become. But washing dishes and cooking meals doesn't make you a wizard, just like pulling weeds doesn't make you a swordsman. But for Eric, it will. He could spend experience he earns from doing chores around his family's farm to raise his stats, skills, and buy advantages that give him specialized bonuses or modifiers to his other abilities. The only question is, what build should he go for? Specialization is important. Jacks of all trades are fine, but it's far better to be a master of one than a master of none. And so, Eric begins the long process of molding himself into the most broken character he can possibly be. The peak moment for any munchkin is when someone looks at what you've done with your build, and you see confusion and disgust in their expression. The best part about this series, and what separates it from the 100 or other so isekai I've read, is the world building. There are well over a dozen races, hundreds of named characters, backstories galore, political maneuvering that would make Machiavelli happy, and proof that people from Earth have not only been to this planet before, but were highly influential on the course of history. However, all of that information is fed to us in bite-sized pieces that build upon each other, morphing from simple crumbs to a feast rich enough to sate the pickiest lore nerd. Eric is born in a small canton known as Königstuhl, basically a farming community of around 1,000 people. He is the fourth son of a farming family. Because they're a farming community, they worship the harvest goddess. There are other gods, and as it turns out, the Trialist Empire of Rhine worships gods that other nations do not worship. But as I stated earlier, the world building is handed out like breadcrumbs, just a little bit at a time. So we know that there are other gods, and while we learn about the harvest goddess's domain and how she's worshipped, the only other god to get more than a mention in the first book is the god of wine. The god of the sun and the goddess of the moon aren't even mentioned until later in the series. As another example of breadcrumbs, we don't even fully understand why the Empire is called the Trialist Empire as opposed to simply the Empire until Book 2. As I mentioned earlier, there are dozens of different sentient races in the book, and they can be broken down into three main categories: human folk, beast folk, and demon folk. Demon folk are a race who have a mana stone inside of their body that allow them to exist outside the normal laws that govern the universe. As an example, their bodies can have higher concentrations of certain metals than other races. That mana stone also accumulates ichor, a nebulous substance not fully understood by mages. The problem is, too much ichor at once drives demon folk mad, turning them into daemons. Kinda like kidney stones in humans. Unfortunately, there is no known way to turn a daemon back into a demon folk. The only race of demon folk we meet in the first book are ogres. Ogres are a matriarchal and warlike society, with women usually around 3 meters in height. Their skin and bones contain a high amount of metal, allowing them to shrug all but the most powerful of blows. They value honor and strength of arms. In contrast, the males are usually much shorter and smaller, around 2 meters in height. Later on in the series, we also meet goblins and a few other types of demon folk. Most of them are just regular people trying to earn enough coin to support themselves and their families. Now, I don't remember what category undead fall under, but they are similar to demon folk. At least the free-willed ones are. Later on, you find out how big of a role vampires play in the history and politics of the Trialist Empire of Rhine. Beast folk are just what they sound like, a sort of human-animal hybrid race. Schuld, the author of Min-Maxing, doesn't hesitate to include as many beast folk races as possible. Werewolves are a wild but proud folk who live for about 50 years. Zentars are half human, half horses, similar to centaurs, but they have horse ears. You learn a lot more about them in Book 7. Seppa are a lesser-known race of centipede-human hybrids who can attack with multiple limbs and have mandibles in their mouths. But in Book 1, the main beastkin we meet is the Arachne, a human-spider hybrid. Arachne descended from 3 different types of spiders: enormous tank-like tarantulas, tall and slender orb weavers, and the tiny nimble jumping spider. Margaret, the childhood friend of Eric, is of the latter kind. She is also the girl on the cover. Quick aside, what is it with the Japanese obsession with spider or insect monster girls? Eric has Margit, but Kimihito Kurosu from Monster Musume Everyday Life with Monster Girls also has a thing for the spider girl in the series. After he got kidnapped by Rachnaray, and she started rambling about how she scared humans and no one would ever love her, Kimihito admitted that he was a leg guy and found her gorgeous. There's a popular Isekai series where the main girl is literally a spider, and another one where the main girl becomes the queen of the hive and conquers the world. In Overlord, there are a lot of maids that are insects. But even Godzilla isn't immune. He's got a moth waifu. Getting back on track, most of the world is populated by human folk. These are bipedal people, the most common of whom are referred to as mensch. Mensch live for about 80 years and make up the lion's share of the population. In addition, you have the changelings, fairies born with a physical form to mortal parents. Unfortunately, they don't often live very long, as the process of growing a physical body is quite taxing for beings of spirit and mana. Later on in the series, we're introduced to Tevisco, a race who changes gender every month or so. They spend a few weeks as a woman, then genderless for a few weeks, then a few weeks as a male. I won't spoil who the Tevisco in the series is, you'll have to find out for yourself. There are also Dvergar, known for their short stature and impressive beards. Dvergar are said to have iron skeletons and boiling blood, making it easy for them to resist the heat of a forge. Stout and around half the height of a mensch, it's hard to mistake them for anything else. Finally, the most powerful of all human folk, the Methuselah. Though they may look like Tolkien's elves, they care not for nature or the light. They do not age, are immune to disease and most poisons, and are born with insane levels of mana and magic capacity. When Eric first read about them while perusing the local church's archives, he thought that the game master who created this setting was insane. In order to keep their near-immortal minds entertained, most Methuselah are hedonistic and debauched. I feel like I've talked enough about the world building, but of almost equal importance is the characters who inhabits the world. I mentioned earlier that information about the world is drip-fed to us in the style of breadcrumbs. Chapters in this series are broken down based on when they occur in Eric's life. Fall, 5th year. Winter, 7th year. Each chapter we learn a little bit more about the world and a little bit more about Eric and his role in the series. But we also get different points of view. For example, there's a scene from Johann's perspective. Johann is Eric's father, and he's struggling to figure out how to save his sickly daughter. Elisa was always sickly. She was born in the winter and barely survived until the spring. And every winter that comes around, her health gets worse and worse. She spends most of the season in bed. One night, their youngest son Eric sleepily brings them a carving of the harvest goddess. Johann's initial thought is that his son stole the carving and they were all about to be in a lot of trouble with the local magistrate. But no, Eric had carved it himself. The carving that his young son made was good enough that Johann was able to donate it to the church in exchange for a miracle to save his youngest daughter. Later on in the series, we meet Lambert, the captain of the local watch. Now, standing armies are expensive, but bandits still exist. So most cantons have a small standing watch who train every day, but also help in the fields in order to earn their keep. But Lambert is the only one who was given a house for his work. He spent years as a soldier before becoming the captain of the watch. Every couple of years, he gathers up all the boys in the village with dreams of being a hero. Remember, this is a full-on medieval fantasy. Death from having your arm torn off by an ogre is a real possibility if you go off to war. So he lines up all the boys and whacks them on the head with a blunted sword. Not hard enough to injure or wound, but hard enough to cause more pain in their young lives than they've ever felt before. This is usually enough to convince the children to just stay home and be farmers. If you can't handle this level of pain, you don't want to be an adventurer or a soldier. But then one boy stands back up and glares at Lambert. Ah, Johann's youngest child. Maybe there's someone worth training this year. At the end of the book, we also get a couple of scenes from a villain's perspective. I won't spoil what happens, but this guy was also isekai'd. But he was also a bit of an ungrateful dick and wound up falling far. This does confirm Eric's suspicion about others coming to the world from Earth. At least, it does to us on-mission readers. But my favorite alternate perspective in the first book is from Margaret, our adorable spider girl and childhood friend of Eric. I covered this in my previous video, but I still wanted to go over it again here. Margaret is an arachne and of the jumping spider type. She's small, quick, and silent. Her mother was an adventurer before she settled down and married her father, the local huntsman. Margaret loved playing foxes and geese, a modified version of tag played by the children in the local forest. However, her natural ability made her dominant at the game, and before long the kids didn't want to play with her. I mean, who can blame them? Kids should learn to lose, but losing all the time is soul-crushing. And then, one day, a boy came along with his older brothers, and he came up with a strategy to defeat Margaret. For the first time ever, Margaret lost, and she was ecstatic. All of a sudden, there was a boy who was a match for her. Of course, this was only the start of their friendship, and as time moves on, that friendship will blossom into something else. But for now, hunting her dear friend, ambushing him, and hanging from his neck like a backpack will have to do. But like most light novels, the lion's share of this series is written from the first-person perspective. which means we spend a lot of time in Eric's head. And Eric's brain is always thinking. So we'll often go off on tangents that seem a little bit left field of the main story. Now, I've derided series like this before, but I celebrate this one. What's the difference? Isn't our main character just rambling? Sort of. Unlike Unwanted Undead Adventurer, where the main character just rambles and repeats himself like he's going into a depressive downward spiral, Eric's inner monologues have a point. He will ramble and reminisce and start making connections in his brain, but then it all coalesces together into a single point. A crescendo, if you will. Something that doesn't happen in other light novels. In fact, reading this series doesn't feel like reading a light novel at all. It feels like a Western fantasy. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at the opening few lines from a different fantasy series, Old Country Bumpkin. Early in the morning, in a dojo in the middle of the remote countryside, my dad started muttering some incomprehensible crap. "Beryl, when am I finally going to get some grandkids?" "What are you expecting from me out here in the sticks, Pops?" "My name's Beryl Gardenant. I'm an old man. Leaving out the details, I've served long as an instructor at a rural swordsmanship dojo that's been going strong for generations. You might think I've omitted the specifics, but there's nothing else to say. I'm simply an old man in a backcountry dojo who teaches students how to wield a sword. Nothing more and nothing less." Okay, so this style of writing relies on the reader to understand the nuances of what's happening. Beryl considers himself old and not very impressive. The rest of the book consists of several of his students bragging about how great he is, and he even has some combat feats that are very impressive. But recognizing his low self-esteem is something you need to read between the lines to discover. It leaves his actions and mannerisms open to interpretation, which I enjoy, but not everyone does. Meanwhile, let's check the writing style of min-maxing my TRPG build. When I realized the first thought that came to my budding ego questioned my own sanity, I began to wonder if I had incurred some sort of karmic debt. My name is Eric. I have no family name, as I was born the fourth son to an independent farming family on the outskirts of the Trialist Empire of Rhine. Simple farmers are not permitted to hold last names, so the best I could do was to identify myself as Eric of Königstuhl Canton. Elsewhere, it would suffice to introduce myself as the last-born son of Johannes. My mother had her hands full tending to the newborn girl she'd delivered over the winter. As a result, I was left to my own devices in the spring of my 5th year, when my psyche began to twist in a peculiar fashion. I'm unsure if I should attribute it solely to a past life, but the underlying cause was certain. Another self dwelled within me, altogether separate from my personal experiences. For better or for worse, a typical 5-year-old child is an innocent and stupid animal. It dribbles with snot and toys with the lives of lesser creatures as it frolics in the mud. This should be all the more common in a rural village, where every semblance of convenience is replaced with nature as far as the eye can see. Yet I was curiously enlightened, endowed with insight as soon as my frayed strand of consciousness grew aware of itself. And this insight was accompanied by experiences both wholly unrelated to me and at once unmistakably my own. These experiences formed memories of a man named Fukumachi Saku. Do you see the difference? The cadence? How the words flow together? How we're being drip-fed information in the form of tidbits of world building? We learned so much in just a few paragraphs, and this is just the intro. This is why I'm worried that the series will never become an anime. How do you convey this level of introspection in an anime without the whole thing being narration? Danon, are you saying the series is perfect? Absolutely not. There's plenty to complain about. Maybe you don't like how slow-paced it is. In fact, that's probably the #1 complaint. At the beginning of Book 2, Eric is forced to leave his home and travel to the capital. That journey takes the whole book. He then spends the next 3 books, including Book 4, which is actually split into 2 volumes, in the capital. It isn't until Book 6 that he returns to Königstuhl, and the whole of Book 6 is that journey. Book 7 is when he finally becomes an adventurer, and Book 8 is him rising through the ranks of the Adventurers Guild. So, unlike a lot of other fast-paced isekai, our boy does not show up, get power, join the Adventurers Guild, and raise his rank so he can crush everyone around him, and start his quest to save the world and gather a harem. In this world, the age of majority is 15, and it takes 6 books for Eric to go from age 5 to 15. Now, for some of you who are used to the single-core anime, this could feel incredibly slow. But for those of us used to long-term storytelling, this is right and proper. Remember, Luffy didn't make it out of East Blue until chapter 100. Goku didn't become a Super Saiyan until episode 95. Rand doesn't become recognized as the Dragon Reborn until book 3. The main story of Lord of the Rings doesn't really begin until you meet Strider, and that's not till chapter 9. The first third of Fellowship of the Ring is basically just filler. No, Tom Bombadil doesn't matter, deal with it. I, for one, am not afraid of long-form storytelling, so long as the writing is good and the characters are enjoyable. Eric is a smart, well-written, and well-rounded character who goes through numerous evolutions. Yes, he is a Japanese businessman in his mid-30s, but he's also a child, going through the emotional development and slow maturation that comes with childhood. Now, when I say smart, I don't mean he's a super genius who solves all of his problems by himself. I mean he's flexible and adapts to new information. He changes his mind based both on intuition and the input from his friends and family. He's not a pushover. If he really wants to do something, he'll do it anyway, regardless of what others think. But he still considers the opinions and feelings of others. To wrap up, if you're wanting a great isekai story with lots of fun and interesting characters, you should check out min-maxing my TRPG build in Another World, spreading the good word of Mr. Henderson. Thanks for tuning in. Once again, a huge shout out to my editor Cute Stuff. I couldn't make these videos without her. If you'd like to hire her to edit your own videos, she can be reached at cutestuff.edits@gmail.com. Link is down below. If you're looking for ways to support the channel directly, you can head on over to patreon.com/Danon. There are several tiers to choose from. You can pick an anime or manga for me to do a video about, or you can join our monthly manga club. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons: Waffles, Jiraiya, Danny, Muffins, Marcus, Squishy, Brett, Roxy, Sean, Pob Zombie, Mark, Borgie, Nazwin, Pedro, Midge, Detroff, Alix, Alex, Julio, Michael, Valeri, Conga, Ignis, RJ, Jay, Greg, Aaron, and Chris. You guys are awesome. I post new anime or manga videos often, or you can click here to watch additional videos. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next time on Musings by Danon.